Hello folks, this lesson is going to be on the human immune system. The function of this system is to protect you against any foreign agents that might get into your body that could possibly cause you some harm. And we just refer to these potentially hazardous agents as pathogens. And they include things like bacteria, viruses, fungi, and also some protozoa. What you initially want to do is prevent these from getting into your body in the first place, and that is the function of what are referred to as your first lines of defense. These are not actually part of your immune system. They are to, well, again, prevent these pathogens from getting into your body. It's only once they get into your body that you really do need to have your immune system that comes into play. So how do you prevent these pathogens from getting into your body in the first place? Well, on the surface of your body, you do have a very effective barrier, that is your skin. So this does serve as a physical barrier. Very, very few things can actually penetrate through your skin and gain access to the inside of your body. So as long as things remain on the outside, it's generally not a problem. If you do have a puncture wound or a cut, this is now when you can have these pathogens that were on the skin to gain entrance into your body. Also, multiple secretions by your skin, and some of these are also going to decrease the likelihood that these pathogens will be able to survive on your skin. So acidic secretions, for example, or normal bacteria flora that you do have on your skin, and competition might prevent the more dangerous ones from making their habitat on your skin as well. So there are other mechanisms as well, though, by which pathogens can get into your body. You can be ingesting them down through your digestive system. So as the food that you are consuming goes through your digestive tract, of course, we know that in your stomach, we do have acidic secretions. Those acidic secretions are in the form of HCl or hydrochloric acid. Makes the stomach very acidic, a pH of 1 to 2. Very, very few bacteria actually like acidic conditions. So this would kill off the vast majority of bacteria. From the stomach, the food does then travel down into the small intestine, the first part of the small intestine. And in the small intestine, instead of being acidic, it is basic. So there is a very rapid change in pH, and this is due to the bicarbonate ions that are coming from the pancreas. So now the pH in the small intestine is going to be somewhere on the order of 8 to 9, slightly acidic. And again, most bacteria, they don't like any conditions that are away from neutral conditions, a pH of around 7. So whether it's acidic in the stomach or basic in the small intestine, not the most habitable environment for most microorganisms. Other routes for pathogens to gain entry into your body through your eyes. So you do, of course, have tears that can wash away pathogens that might be in and around your eyes. There's also an enzyme. This here, lysozyme, is an enzyme that you do find in your tears, and it does specifically attack and destroy bacteria, preventing them from going any further and eventually accessing the inside of your body. We know as well that there is mucus that is found on various internal surfaces in your body. So this includes the surface of the respiratory tract, your trachea that it has identified here. It also includes the urinary tract, the reproductive tract, the digestive tract. All of these do have mucus secretions. This is a sticky material, and pathogens will stick to this material, and that in itself will prevent them from going any further. Also, as part of the respiratory system, you have some tiny little hairs that are sticking out of the cells that do line your trachea and the back of the mouth and nasopharynx area. These tiny little hairs, they are called cilia, and these cilia, they are going to sweep debris in a specific direction, and that is going away from the lungs up toward your nose and your mouth, where you can then cough and sneeze out any debris, which might include pathogens that might be traveling down toward the lungs. One final thing to note here Remember that in your large intestine, you do have trillions of bacteria. For the most part, they don't cause any harm to us. And in many cases, they form a symbiotic relationship where, in fact, we do get something from this relationship as well. In general, as long as the bad ones are kind of kept in check by the normal microorganisms or microbiota, they generally don't cause a problem. And in fact, as mentioned, they form symbiotic relationships and may also help to assist and train our immune system in terms of what might be the more dangerous pathogens that could in fact cause us some harm. Well, what happens when these pathogens do get past the first line of defense? Now you do have your immune system that actually does come into play. And when we do talk about your immune system, that is going to involve the white blood cells. So what we'll see is that there are a number of different white blood cells that are involved. This first one, though, the second line of defense, it is non-specific. And what that really means is that whatever the kind of pathogen, bacteria, virus, fungi, protist, whatever it is, that does get past your first lines of defense, the second line of defense, some of your white blood cells will take a look at them, and what they're just looking for is a generic class of proteins or molecules on the surface of these cells and viruses that you would not find on your own cells. So what they're really looking for in this picture at the bottom here, so we have a bacteria, we have a virus sticking out of the cell membrane of all cells, sticking out of the cell membrane of the bacteria here are some proteins or glycoproteins. This is what your immune system will see as taking a look at and asking the question, do I recognize it? And if it is on a bacteria, then your immune system would not recognize it. Viruses don't have a cell membrane, but they typically do have a protein coat, and they would also have things sticking out of the protein coat, which your body would not recognize. As soon as your body does not recognize something, that is what is referred to as an antigen, and that is what is eventually going to trigger an immune response. So it's not the entire pathogen that is an antigen. It is these smaller kind of subunits that we do find sticking out of the protein coat or the cell membrane that is going to activate and trigger an immune response. We'll come back to that a little bit later and talk about those further when we get on to the third line of defense. But in this picture here, what we can see is that we do have bacteria that have got past the line of defense. In this case, it is the skin. So we have a cut or we have a puncture wound, and those bacteria that it's showing here in green, those are now gaining access into the body. So a few things are going to happen very, very quickly here. All throughout your tissues in your body, what you do have are what are called mast cells. So mast cells are a communicating cell, and they're going to send out the signals to white blood cells, and they're going to say that, well, we do have something that has breached the first lines of defense, and now something has to be done about it. The chemicals that are produced by these mast cells, they are histamine chemicals. So these are going to call in white blood cells into the area, and they're going to do a couple of other things as well. Blood vessels that we find in the area, it's going to cause them to open up and become more permeable. So what this means is we're going to allow for fluids to escape out of the blood vessels, and along with the fluids, we're also going to have some white blood cells that were in the blood being transported through the blood, and now what they can do is they can get out into the surrounding tissue, what is called the extracellular fluid or the interstitial fluid, the fluid in between the cells, and that's where we're going to have all of these bacteria, and that's what the white blood cells are then going to find. At the bottom of this picture, what we can see is these are a whole bunch of red blood cells here. So they, of course, should be inside of the blood vessels. This is a portion of the blood vessel that we do see right here. And it's these blood vessels in the area where you do have the pathogens that are going to become more permeable. Blood vessels are made up of individual cells. These are individual cells that we do see right here. So normally they're very, very tightly packed together. But when they do become more permeable, these blood vessels, the space between them is going to open up. And what that is going to allow for Our white blood cells, if this is a white blood cell here, which is being transported through the blood, it's going to allow it to get into that surrounding tissue. And this, in fact, is one type of white blood cell right here that is referred to as a neutrophil. So histamine is going to allow for these white blood cells to come into the area, to infiltrate that area where we do have the bacteria or whatever other pathogens. So we've seen this one here, the mast cells, they are the signaling molecules. Neutrophils, dendritic cells, macrophages, these ones are all referred to as phagocytic cells. They are going to engulf and they are going to destroy whatever the pathogen is. So all three of these ones here are phagocytic cells. So if we do take a look at, in fact, this mast cell over to the right-hand side here, what it is showing is that even this one is engulfing the pathogen, engulfing the bacteria, so it will surround it, it will engulf it, it will destroy it, and that's what the macrophages, neutrophils, and dendritic cells are going to do as well. The big one for you to understand, though, is this one, macrophages. In fact, that does mean big eaters, and they are the ones that are going to do most of the finding and engulfing and destroying of these pathogens that do gain entry into your body. Again, all of these, they are not picky about what they are destroying, and that's why this is non-specific. It doesn't matter what sort of pathogen it is, as long as these are taking a look at these surface antigens or surface glycoproteins, they don't recognize it, then it becomes an antigen, and what that means that they're going to swallow up and they're going to destroy these. It doesn't matter what they are, they're not picky about it. We can also see here that going along with the increased permeability of the blood vessels, we also do see some other signs that there is an infection in that area, and that is what is referred to as inflammation. So the second line of defense, it is non-specific, and it's also referred to as the inflammatory response. With inflammation, this is what we also have. Redness, because there's more blood that's going into the area. Swelling, because the blood vessels are leaky and fluid is leaving the blood vessels into the surrounding area. Pain that goes along with that swelling. And these are going to be some of the conditions that we will see that do go along with the inflammation. One other cell type that I have here, and these are referred to as the natural killers, or NK. These ones here are a little bit different. Some pathogens are a little bit trickier than others, quite often viruses. In some cases, bacteria as well. What they can do is they can actually get inside of your cells, and they can sort of hide out inside of your cells. And if they're inside of your cells, these other engulfers, the macrophages, the neutrophils, the dendritic cells, they actually can't find them inside of the cells. So what these natural killers are going to do is they are going to find your own cells that have been infected by something like a virus, and they will actually destroy your own cells. But this is a good thing, because if they've been infected by a virus, they are no longer of any use to you. And in fact, what they have just become is a virus factory. So important that those are destroyed. We'll see another mechanism to destroy these as well. But these ones here, the natural killers, again, they are like the macrophages, the neutrophils, and the dendritic cells. They are non-specific. So they're not looking for a specific kind of virus that has infected a cell or bacteria that has infected a cell. It's any kind of viral or bacterial infected cells. They're again just looking for this generic class of changes that have taken place on the surface of your cells, and then they will go ahead and destroy them. One other point with this slide here, and it does have to do with that chemical histamine, the signaling molecule produced by the mast cells, and it is related to allergies. So what an allergy really is an inappropriate immune response. Your exposure to certain allergens does lead to signs and symptoms, can lead to some fairly serious consequences in some cases, but in reality, these allergens are not going to do you any harm. So your immune system, it is kind of making a mistake. So signs and symptoms that we might see along with allergies will include some of these things that we saw here with the inflammation. So with an allergy, typically there is a large amount of histamine that is produced, and that's what leads to the increased blood flow into the area and the symptoms that do go along with it. If it's localized, it's usually not such a big problem. If it's systemic, what that means is now it is throughout the entire body. So what we do have in that area where the histamine is being produced is we do have blood vessel dilation. And what that means is the blood vessels are going to open up. So this is the normal diameter of a blood vessel. Histamine is going to cause this. That's going to make the blood vessels more permeable. And what it's also going to do is result in a drop in, I'll put it as BP, a drop in blood pressure. Localized, not such a big problem. Systemic, this can be a huge problem. Blood pressure can drop so low that that blood can no longer be circulated around. It can't circulate to the vital organs. It can't circulate to the brain, and that can ultimately lead to death. So a severe overreaction to an allergen is what is referred to as anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock. So it can lead to death really because of two reasons. The first one I mentioned, which is going to be a drop in blood pressure. I had it over here as an increase in blood pressure, but that should be the opposite. That should be a drop in blood pressure that does take place when we do have dilation of the blood vessels. So drop in blood pressure due to, the actual term is vasodilation. Dilation means the opening up. But there's something else that's going on as well, and that has to do with your airway passages. And what it does in your airway passages is it causes the opposite, which is constriction. I'll put it as airway passage constriction. So now we have the blood pressure has gone down. You're not circulating as much blood around. Your airway passages are closing off. You can't get as much oxygen into your body. And unless this is dealt with fairly quickly, this is a life-threatening condition, anaphylaxis. So all of this so far is, again, dealing with the second line of defense, which is non-specific. But quite often what does happen is it's one single bacteria, species or strain of bacteria or virus that gets into your body. And in some cases, they can divide very, very rapidly. So it's not just a few that your body might be dealing with. It could be millions in a very short period of time that do have to be dealt with. And again, usually it's not many, many different kinds of bacteria or viruses. It's a one specific kind. So now what your body needs is a more focused response to deal with one particular pathogen. And this is part of the third one, which is the third line of defense. So this one here is the specific immune response. There are two different sides to this picture. There are two different portions to the third line or the specific immune response. But what it does all start out with is with the pathogen, the recognition of the antigens. And the one that we have here in this picture that is going to be identifying the antigen is the cell that we saw before, the macrophage. So kind of think of the macrophage as white blood cell number one that comes along. That's the one that encounters the pathogen. That's the one that recognizes the antigen and the pathogen, and it is going to destroy them. So it does engulf them, it does destroy them, but these macrophages are going to do something else as well. What it has in brackets here, APC, stands for antigen presenting cell. The antigen is what was on the surface of the pathogen. It's going to take that antigen, hold it out on its surface, and it's going to present it to other cells that are part of the immune system. So for that reason, these macrophages, they are referred to as antigen presenting cells. And what they're really doing is they're asking for some assistance from the rest of the immune system because they are becoming overwhelmed with this specific pathogen that has gained entrance into your body and can possibly do some harm. So what is the macrophage going to do and who is it presenting this information to? Well, it's going to be presenting it to the second kind of white blood cell that's going to come along in terms of this order or sequence, and it is referred to as the helper T cells. We're going to see T cells and we're going to see B cells. Remember that all kinds of blood cells, whether they're red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets, they are produced in the bone marrow of your larger bones. If it is a T cell, it is a white blood cell that matures in your thymus, a gland in your chest area. If it is a B cell, that means that it matures in your bone marrow. Sometimes these are also referred to as T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. I'll use the names interchangeably: T cells, T lymphocytes, B cells, and B lymphocytes. So this one here, the helper T cells, they are cells that have matured in the thymus, and they're going to really, as the name implies, help out with the immune response. So they in themselves don't necessarily do anything in terms of getting rid of the pathogen, at least not directly, but what they're going to do is two different things. They are going to activate another kind of lymphocyte that are called the B cells. So these B cells here, the ones that are activated are the ones that are going to be very, very specific for the antigen that is on that particular pathogen that you are being exposed to. So it's not just any B cells. These B cells are ones that are specific for the pathogen that you are trying to destroy. So when these B cells are activated, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to divide. You're going to form a whole bunch of these B cells. Eventually, they're going to mature into what are called plasma cells. So plasma cells are B cells. They have just matured, and their function is to produce antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that are going to circulate through your blood. What they are going to do is find the pathogen. They're going to attach to the antigen on the surface of the pathogen. Again, doesn't matter if we're talking about a virus, a bacteria, a protist, or a fungi. They will have antigens on their surface. These antibodies will attach to those, and they can either directly destroy the pathogen through what is called the complement system, or they can eventually aid in the destruction of these pathogens by causing a whole bunch of them to link together and then making it a lot easier for the big eaters, the macrophages, to come along and swallow up not just one, but a whole bunch of them at the same time. Now, talking about at the same time, helper T cells are going to do something else as well. They're going to stimulate another kind of T cell, and these ones are called the cytotoxic T cells. So I'm going to put the number 3 down twice because it's really at the same time that the helper T cells are stimulating the B cells and the cytotoxic T cells. So we already mentioned the antibodies. They're going to find the pathogens, but these are the pathogens that are circulating around in the blood, maybe also in the interstitial or intracellular fluid, or sorry, extracellular or interstitial fluid. But there are also, as mentioned before, some of these pathogens that will get into your cells. So how are you going to deal with those? Because these antibodies, these Y-shaped antibodies, they can't actually get into your cells. So cells that have been taken over by a pathogen, that's going to be the function of these cells here. What they are going to do is they are going to kill your own cells. So why would they kill your own cells? Well, because they've been infected by a virus, or also if it is a cancer cell. So cancerous cells should be destroyed. There is something wrong with them. They should be destroyed by your own immune system. And that again is one of the functions of these cytotoxic T cells. Transplanted organs and tissues, because they are foreign, they will also be attacked and destroyed by the cytotoxic T cells. So again, what's the difference between the B cells and the cytotoxic T cells. The B cells are going to mature into the plasma cells. They're going to produce the antibodies. And as it says down here, these are going to defend against the pathogens that are outside of your cells. It's going to bind to the pathogens and it's going to aid in their destruction either through phagocytosis or through the complement system. What about the cytotoxic T cells? They're going to defend against these pathogens that are now inside of your cells. It's going to destroy them and cause what is called the lysis of those cells, and also destroying cancer cells if any of those do exist. So if all goes well, you're now going to have eliminated that pathogen. Once you have eliminated the pathogen and killed off all the cells that are infected with that particular pathogen, what you also want to do is prepare for any subsequent exposure to exactly that same pathogen. So in addition to making the plasma cells that will produce the antibodies and activating the cytotoxic T cells, which will destroy your own infected cells, you're also going to make what are called memory cells. There are memory B cells and there are memory T cells. So the whole point behind these memory cells is if by any chance you ever happen to be exposed by that same antigen again, you can respond much more quickly. So these memory cells will very quickly lead to the production of active cytotoxic T cells, plasma cells, spitting out the antibodies, destroying your own infected cells, and the results of that exposure, well, in fact, you may not even notice that you are exposed to that antigen a second time. Also, once you have eliminated the pathogen, you don't want to continue to go through this process. You don't need to make any more of the B cells. You don't need to make any more of the plasma cells. You don't need any more of these cytotoxic T cells. You don't need to activate them, because you have gotten rid of that particular pathogen. So the last kind of cell type that you do need to know about, they are now going by the name regulatory T cells, or Tregs. They also go by the older name suppressor T cells. Couple of different functions here that it's showing on this very small diagram. So once you have eliminated that pathogen and you don't need to do anything more about it, then you need to tone down that portion of the immune response. So this one here, the magnitude of that particular immune response for one specific pathogen, it's going to be decreased. You don't need to make, once again, the plasma cells and the activated cytotoxic T cells for this pathogen, because you did already get rid of it. There are things that can go wrong with these suppressor T cells, so they should keep your immune system in check so they don't attack your own cells. If that does happen, your immune system attacking your own cells, that is what is called an autoimmune disease. So usually the idea is that the Tregs are going to keep your immune system cells in check so that doesn't happen. May also be related to allergies, inappropriate responses of these Tregs, allowing for an over-response of your other immune system cells, responding to something and causing an inflammatory response when in fact they won't cause you any problem. And there also might be some role here in terms of your normal microbiota that you do find, in particular in your large intestine. They may actually protect them, so your immune system doesn't destroy some of these bacteria that in fact are not only harmless, but they may be beneficial in some ways as well. So just going back to kind of summarize the cell types that are involved in the immune response and the order or sequence that they are involved in the immune response. Number one, macrophage swallows, engulfs the pathogen, presents the antigen to. Number two, the helper T cells. Helper T cells are then going to activate B cells that again are very, very specific for that particular pathogen and antigen. And the same thing with the cytotoxic T cells. Once you have gone through and dealt with this particular pathogen, you want to make the memory cells. So we'll call those our number 4 because again, both of these would be at the same time, both memory B cells and memory T cells. And then finally, the last one that we have coming along here is going to be our suppressor T cells or the Tregs. So the final thing here is going to be a little bit on vaccination and immunization. And what this has to do with is what we saw on the previous slide, which is with memory cells. So this is what would normally happen if you do have an infection. You have a primary immune response as you're exposed to that pathogen for the first time. It's kind of slow and it's not a very strong response. If you are exposed to that same pathogen again a second time, well, now you get a stronger and more rapid response. So the idea behind vaccination, also known as immunization, is to trick your body into thinking that you've seen the pathogen before, but in fact you haven't. So what they will do is they will take a pathogen, they will destroy it. A dead pathogen cannot do you any harm. Or they might just take the antigen and they will inject that into your body. That is what the vaccination is. So if it is a flu vaccine, it might be the dead virus or it might be the antigens from the virus that they're injecting into your body. It cannot possibly cause the flu. What does it do though? Well, it's tricked your body. You can't really get sick from this, but what your body is going to do is kind of go through this primary immune response when really you're not going to get sick. But what you have now done at the end of this process is now you've made memory cells, memory B cells, memory T cells. So if sometime in the future you are exposed to that pathogen, your body thinks that it's seen it before. It already has the memory cells. So now you can get a very strong and rapid immune response, and it's less likely that the person is going to be harmed or possibly die from exposure to that pathogen if they have gone through this immunization process.